For those of you who've watched the series, The Toys That Made Us, I don't know how many of you have seen Toys That Made Us. Well, our panelists are going to share with you a lot about the show. We're going to see some behind-the-scenes stuff, some stuff that was left on the cutting room floor. So I want to introduce some of our panelists. Daniel Vonner, Brian Volk. Brian Volk Weiss, Billy Galaxy, and Rich Mayerick. Thanks, guys.
We didn't want to disappoint anybody. We had a lot of complaints the last couple panels that our presentation was perfect. So we have deliberately made some mistakes this time. So I want to know, we didn't want to let you down, and I will turn this over to my esteemed colleague, Rich Mayerick.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you guys are all having an amazing Celebration Friday. It's so awesome to see you guys all in this room. It's so awesome to just be back at conventions. So give everyone a hand for being here. As Gus so generously ran down, I am your moderator, Rich Mayerick. I wear many hats at the Nacelle Company, and this just happens to be one of them. But on to more important people, we've got Brian Volk Weiss, our CEO. We don't have Robin.
Robin ran season 3 of Toys That Made Us. She was supposed to be here, but unfortunately she's not. But she's a very nice person and very talented.
We have David Vonner. And Billy Galaxy. Last but not least. So we're going to start out by talking about how the Toys That Made Us series got started, and you can't have that conversation without talking about the episode that we're all here to talk about today, the Star Wars episode. Brian, I'm going to kick this to you to kind of open that conversation as to how everything really, like the initial seeds got planted and how we sold the show.
So the initial seeds got planted with this little guy right here. For those of you unfamiliar, his name is R2-D2. I love toys. I was an only child. That's the only thing I can think of as to why I never stopped playing and buying them.
I'm an only child too.
Look at that. What are the odds? Look at that. Are you an only child?
I am an only child.
What?
Look at that. We some selfish kids.
Rich is the odd man out. But basically, I sell TV shows for a living, and I was like, hey, I love toys. Maybe I should try and, for a change, sell something that I'm actually excited about. Please don't watch Animal Nation on Animal Planet, because then you will see a show I sold that I was not excited about. So Toys That Made Us, I tried selling it for about 7 years. We do a lot of stand-up comedy for Netflix and for everybody. So very, very luckily, the dude who was buying stand-up comedy from us at Netflix, he ended up transferring over to this new department at Netflix, brand new, called Unscripted. And one of his first shows that he ever bought would become known as Toys That Made Us.
So just in case anyone was confused, this is not the panel about the toys that made America. No.
Yeah, so this is the cover. So when you sell TV shows, you come in with a deck and with a tape. That was the cover of the deck we made for History Channel. And by the way, History Channel verbally bought the show, and then, as does tend to happen every now and then, they backed out of it, much to their chagrin.
Which led us
And then after that, Nat Geo almost bought the show, verbally did buy the show, and then they also backed out. They're okay. They can live without us, but History definitely bummed out.
And then finally, we found our home.
Yes, I guess I told the story out of order, just like George Lucas did with the prequels. But yes, Netflix, in case you didn't know, and it'd be kind of weird, anybody who's in here that didn't know, but thank you for being here if you didn't know. That really is fandom. We did sell the show to Netflix.
And let's talk a little bit about what we're about to watch with the sales tape.
Yes, so real quick, when we were talking to the executive, guy named Devin Griffin, who did buy the show, he needed to bring a tape to all of his bosses to say, hey, we should buy the show. What he told us was, and I know this is going to sound weird, but if you think about it, it does make sense. He was like, think of that 70s show. It's the perfect show for Netflix, because the people on the show, they're all really, really good looking. That brings in the young people, but it takes place in the 70s. That brings in the old people. So with that in mind, we shot this tape. 50% of it was shot in what I consider to be my home store, which is Blast from the Past in Burbank. And the other half, shout out to Larry. I also, and then I got to give props to my wife who's not here. The rest of it, everything with the toys was shot in my living room that was turned into a sound stage. And my wife was like literally bringing sodas and waters to the crew, which was very nice of her. And I just want to give him a shout out because he's here. Where are you, Louis? There he is. Stand up. We have a celebrity in our midst. Luis, who I didn't even know, was referred to me by this gentleman right here, and you will see he is in the tape because it was very important to Netflix that it be a global show. So you will see how our good friend over there helped us make it a global sales tape.
Let's give it a watch. So needless to say, that sold the show.
Yeah,
It's sold. So once that happens, we have to move into before even the pre-production, there's like a pre-production, but there's a whole massive litany of things that must be done before we even start shooting. And a lot of that is just kind of planning how we want the show to go and like what episodes we want to do, who we want to talk to. Let's talk a little bit about the beginning of the show itself, though, mainly the opening theme that everyone is so familiar with and loves dearly, I'm sure. But Brian, talk us through what we're looking at here. This is from your own personal notebook.
Yeah, so I always like to talk about the elephant in the room. I have been convicted of psychological abuse a few times against our art department. So they get these things that I doodle, and then they turn them into what you will see at home. So let's see what we got here. I haven't looked at this in a long time. But basically, this is what would lead to the opening, and and this was based on my mom taking me to Toys R Us when I was a kid. And this is literally us, except I have an imaginary brother or sister in the car with me. But that's that.
So they took this and through magic and amazing skill turned it into this. And this is looking a little bit more like what you recognize when you watch the show. But yeah, that's kind of a bit of the process is how you take an idea and turn it into something that we can actually give to our animators to make the opening that you guys all know.
And the opening of the song, this is one of my favorite things. I don't know if I've ever said this before, but the song in the opening is something I've been laughing about since I was even 10. Is how much exposition the cartoons would pack into a 9-second song. So if there's so when you hear it, I think we're going to play it, right?
Oh,
Are we? Oh, sorry, we're not going to play it. We would never play it here.
Never.
But if we would have played it, and you hear it, notice how we tried to cram as much exposition into it as we could.
You have to sell the
But
show.
we'll never play it.
Never again.
Ever.
We wouldn't ever do that to you guys.
That'd be terrible. Because then you'd be like listening to it in your head all day, and that would not be nice to you.
Nah, it's an earworm. So let's talk about starting the show with Star Wars, because obviously that was a big recipe for the success and the momentum of the rest of the show. Why did we decide to go with Star Wars first?
So I am not a dentist or a banker or a lawyer in New York because of Star Wars. The book you see there, that, as I always like to joke, even though it's true, the tape holding it together is 30 years old. So when I read that book, that's when I figured out Star Wars was actually like a movie and not like real life. So why wouldn't we start a show about toys with Star Wars?
Right, especially too because, you could argue that, Star Wars, those action figures really kind of propelled what everyone recognizes from the 80s. You can't really have a lot of what you had in the 80s if you didn't start with Star Wars. On that note, Billy, do you have your most treasured or your most, revered or memorable Star Wars moment growing up? Something that emboldened you to the toys?
My first memory in life is actually a Star Wars memory where I was at a store and I can't remember if it was either Greedo or Walrus Man, and I had to have it, and I grabbed it, and it was big on me because I was pretty little. It was probably a 21 back card, so I was like 79 or something, and I seem to remember getting in trouble. That's my mom right there. And I don't know if she remembers this, but I remember very well that I had a death grip on this thing, and it had to be purchased for me because it would have been ripped apart, being pulled away from me. And
She remembers.
So from a very early age, Star Wars has had a major impact on my life, and obviously still to this day, it impacts my life because it's a major portion of my job.
Dave, how about you?
Well, for me, everything that is pretty cool with pop culture, it was always introduced from my mom. So my mom was actually a very big Star Wars fan before me. I went to the theaters with her to see it. I actually did not like it. I was 5 years old, and they wanted like the stereophonic sound. I don't know if you guys remember what that was, but you had to sit in the front of the theater to get these giant speakers blasting in your face. So I was a 5-year-old kid. The whole entire time, the movie's blasting in my ears. I did not like it. So I'm sitting there crying the whole time. My mom wants to take me to a matinee because she was like, you have to like this movie. Like, you have to like this movie. And I'm like, why you all like push me like this movie? So we wound up going again to the matinee. I loved it. But she had went to the store and bought like all these curtains and pajamas and shirts. She was like, don't you like Chewbacca? Don't you like Darth Vader? Don't you like Luke? And I'm like, I guess so. So she just kind of was like grabbing all the toys, like, ooh, look at that, ooh, look at that, ooh, look at that, it's the shit. And I was like, okay. So that was really my introduction to the toys. Like, my mom just saw all the stuff that she loved because she's a big, big Star Trek fan. So to her, this was like, you know, Star Trek on crack. so she was like, hey, like, this is it, you know, and that's how I got into it. And this isn't the original, but this is one of the first ones. And she was like, they got a brother in the movie. And also, too, like, I don't know if y'all remember this, but like back in the day, you know, it wasn't too many brothers in a lot of movies like this. But a lot of black people loved Darth Vader because he was, you know, one, all black, but also voiced by James Earl Jones. So, you know, a lot of black people, they were like, the brothers out there kicking butt. So, so my mom loves Darth Vader, and I love Luke Skywalker. So it's kind of like this weird. Yeah. So yeah, that was my introduction to Star Wars toys.
It's amazing. I am not an only child, but my sister is younger than me. So the closest thing I had to an older sibling was my older cousin Eric, and he had the entire Vader case. It was, you know, doubled, you know, in all of those compartments with all of his figures. And I would look forward to going to his place and playing with those figures as much as actually seeing him. And he went through the obligatory, well, I'm going to college, I should probably do something with my toys. And he, you know, generously bestowed those Star Wars figures to me when he left, probably never thinking that he would regret that decision. And he has not, you know, stopped reminding me about how lucky I was that he, you know, is a good family member and isn't going to ask for them back. But they're the most treasured things that I have in my entire collection are his Star Wars figures because, I mean, that was one of my very first impressions of playing with any toys at all. So, yeah, I think it's that kind of a massive generational appeal with these toys and this property that, you know, again, solidifies why it was the perfect episode to start the show with. So, once we start the show, we have to come up with the interviews because that is the framework, the foundation of the show is the story told by the people who were there, the people who were designing these toys, marketing these toys, making these toys. And it's one of the most complex elements of the show and one that we have to make sure that we do correctly. Otherwise, you know, everything else kind of unravels. Brian, do you want to talk about how important that process is finding, the people we need to talk to, and then finding out the people that we don't know we need to talk to until we talk to those people?
So it's funny, you know, we've done a fair amount of shows now since Toys That Made Us that, you know, use a similar style, a similar, for lack of a better word, infrastructure to actually make the shows. All of that was discovered while making season 1 of Toys That Made Us. And we literally flew to Cincinnati. We had like 5 or 6 people that we knew, and we interviewed those people. One of them is right over there.
There he is!
Stand up right there. Broke into his basement. And by the way, I mean, all jokes aside, it's funny, I have one now myself, but when we were shooting the show, your basement, I had never been in a collection like that. So, and not to mention, then I would be in Gus Lopez's house 4 years later. But it was all it was even new to me. Like, oh, and here's Jim right now.
Everybody say hi to Jim Swearingen.
Life imitates art. Welcome, Jim. Welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you for being here. So that's him, I guess about 4 years ago. So Jim was actually one of the people we had reached out to ahead of time. And Jim, just like a lot of the other people, they were very generous. And while we were there, and you know, the other thing, which is, oh, by the way, I'm being a jerk. Randy Falk, right over there. Stand up, Randy. One of the more humorous moments from the tape. He's the guy who says, there goes his rocket. Also happens to work at NECA. But, we were in a situation where we were meeting all these people, and then they were like, oh my God, you're legit? Oh, you gotta know this guy, you gotta know that girl. And we just stayed in Cincinnati for like 5 days, interviewing everybody that we could. The one person we did have, and this is now happens to us fairly often, and I would have bet you everything I owned at the time that he would have not shown up, was this guy named Jim Kipling, who was the head of business affairs for Kenner. And I don't know how often any of you deal with lawyers, but it's very unusual for them to just start, telling you everything. And not only did Jim show up, we had purposely put him at the end of the day because we didn't think he was going to show up so we could get out early and, start drinking. But he did show up, and not only did he show up, I don't even know if you know this, he literally he walked in with this big binder, and he never told us what he was, he never said anything, and then halfway through the interview, he's like, well, as you know, George didn't make any money from the toys. And we're like, oh, sir, I'm so sorry, I don't mean to be rude. You mean he made all his money from the toys? And he goes, no, he didn't make any money from the toys. We're like, well, no, he made all his money from the toys. He didn't make any money from the movies. And he's like, well, I did bring the contract. And he opens the binder and he starts showing us that, yeah, George made, it's in the show. Even now, by the way, it feels weird saying this out loud. He literally made 2.5% for all the toys, where I don't know about you, but me growing up, we had all heard that he had made all his money from the toys and had made none of the money from the movies. All of you nodding your heads who are like, wow, that's crazy, that means you haven't watched the show. So I encourage you to go back, because it really opened up the whole show, and we were already editing it, and this actually now happens all the time. Don't tell our head of production, though he knows. We literally started the show from scratch. We threw out the cut we had and re-edited everything based on that interview with Jim Kipling. Did you know Jim when you were at Kenner?
I don't think I knew the details, but I knew that George wasn't as happy as he might have seemed. Yeah, he was making a lot of money, but not nearly as much as he does now.
That is correct. And by the way, the first royalty check that George, ever got, and this will put it all in perspective for you, even though he was only getting 2.5% after expenses, that first check was still over $3 million. And he would get one twice a year until the contract ran out. People are like, the contract ran out? That means you didn't watch the show.
But you bring up a great point, is that, we can start out an episode thinking that we know what story we're going to tell, or at least have a good idea, and then all it takes is that one interview to basically show us that, oh, there's actually a more authentic story, a more, pressing story that we need to tell, and then it's a matter of kind of course correcting and figuring out how to build the episode around that as well. So that's something that, we encountered first on the Star Wars episode, but happened many times throughout the rest of the series too, which is kind of the organic process of doing a show like this, because our goal when we do any shows like this is to tell the most honest and authentic and sincere story possible, and that means it's like kind of journalism. You got to follow all the leads and see where those leads take you. And this is just kind of an example of all the different people that we've talked to, and we talked to people like Jim. We talk to people like Kipling, but we also talk to people on every kind of corner, every angle of the story, whether it's someone in the marketing, someone who works in the toy industry, collectors, Randy, everyone who has all of these people have a piece of the story that we're trying to tell. So each one of those interviews is really important.
By the way, another fun fact you'll see in that still, a lot of the people are standing in front of green screens. In the show, they're standing in front of a collection, and that was my, at the most, 2% of what I have now, collection in their backgrounds. And I remember when Randy first saw it, Randy was like, where did we shoot that? And I'm like, that's movie magic, my friend.
And there's some great interviews. I know I always still get a little choked up at Okada's interview at the end when he's talking about if you had a bad day at school and you came home and Luke was waiting for you, and when you're Luke Skywalker, the Force is always with you. Stuff like that. It just really kind of makes all that much the episodes that much more magical. But once we have the interview set and we kind of know what story we're going to tell, then we actually have to go out and shoot the interviews, because a lot of times the first interviews we do are over the phone, and then we actually have to go out and travel and shoot the ones you see on camera. But there's a few other really important nuggets of this series that we need to talk about. One of those is Relics. Brian, talk to us about the importance of Relics and why they were so integral to the series.
It's a joke at the office. Everybody I work with is always like, oh, Brian's going to bring up the relics. But I think the relics are really important because thanks to people like Gus, Luis, everybody, like, you see these things that are unearthing. It's like, we have these here, if I can hold up your Lando, and it's like these mean so much to us. But there is so much business, so much physical process, politics. By the way, for those of you who don't remember, that's me being nice, or haven't seen the show, that's me being mean. Jim, just to make sure everyone understands this, even if you haven't seen the show, or if you have seen the show, you may have forgotten. Jim's read the script. Let's stop there for a second. Nobody reads scripts. Nobody. Not only does he read the Star Wars script after every single company, Mattel, Hasbro, you name it, Mego, though Marty denies it, but I think he's lying, because I trust Jim. Everybody passed. This guy right here is 100% responsible for these things being right here, because not only does he read the script, he does a very, very dangerous thing. He starts heckling his boss to do it. And his boss is like, get out of here, movies with merch, they don't ever make profitable toys. And he kept heckling his boss until his boss let him go out. He's like, I'm standing right here. I could tell the story myself. I'm sorry to be doing this to you. But he's the guy, all of this, us here, our childhoods, all of this is because, and I assume everybody here has had or has a boss. It's not a lot of fun when your boss says no to keep fucking with them. And thank you. On behalf of my childhood and on behalf of my career, on behalf of everything, I thank you for heckling your boss.
I'm happy to do that. Yeah.
Jim, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, we were lucky. I was in an area that wasn't responsible for making money. So our charge was to keep after people when they weren't believing what we were telling them. So they had the good sense to let us keep doing it, because we did come back a time or two to the heads of the company and say, this really is something we need to pursue. And after all the other companies had turned it down, they were, well, Mattel knows what they're doing. Bernie was from Mattel, but he was smart enough to let us keep persisting. So it really did take a while. And for that reason, I got to do all the fun stuff, traveling and meeting all the people and getting to be, do the Hollywood thing, while everybody else was trying to count the pennies. So.
Thank you for being persistent, Jim.
My pleasure.
So once we have those relics, we put them on our iconic light box, and there's some obvious inspiration that Brian can go into as to why the light box setup looks the way it does and why we decided to go in that direction. Yeah,
so again, that light box now, and there's actually, not to ruin your perception of the light box, there's actually 3 of them. They have been all over the world. Literally all over the world. One of them is in England right now, permanently. One of them is in, I believe, Ecuador at the moment. They rotate, they come apart so they can fit into a little case and all that stuff. But, like I was saying earlier, all of this knowledge came from making season 1 of Toys That Made Us, and the inspiration was the floor from 2001's extremely bizarre old man in the kind of hotel room scene.
Billy, as a purveyor of vintage toys, can you maybe speak a little bit about the importance of having these toys be so, focused and upfront when we were doing the show, and how that connects to the fans who are watching it?
Well, I think most of the fans here were probably already well into and collecting these things before the Toys That Made Us came out. But it really introduced, the whole history of this, and it really exposed the importance of the development of the toys and people we never had heard of and their names. And, really shone a spotlight on the important people behind it. I mean, sure, George Lucas created Star Wars, but it's people like Jim that, they created that stuff. They made it so we could hold them, we could take them home, we could collect them, we could have them forever. And, I think that for me, the important part of the show was putting a spotlight on people like him, all the behind-the-scenes people, the artists that did the beautiful box art and photography and all of these things. And it also, as a dealer, it made stuff more popular amongst a mainstream audience. It's just a continuation of geek culture becoming mainstream culture. And, this was one of the catalysts, I think, of collecting becoming, what it is. I mean, it's grown exponentially over the last 5 years, and, I think this show is a big part of that.
Yeah. I think you make a good point, too, is that, one of the most rewarding elements of the show, in my mind, is giving people like Jim and everyone else that we talk to the credit and the basically the optics that they were so integral in making everyone's childhoods important. When you flip a toy over from the 80s, you don't see who designed it or painted it or marketed it. So a lot of people had no idea who the people were behind all these toys that made their childhood so memorable. So making this show and giving people like Jim the chance to actually tell their story is, I think, one of the most amazing things we could have done. Dave, as a toy designer yourself, how did these toys influence you into, doing what you did today?
It was, I don't need the mic. It was everything. I mean, that was my whole world. I mean, being an only child, it never was an escape. It was just part of my daily. The reality was weird to me. Like going outside of my room, that was weird to me. But staying in the house, with all my figures and everything was such a huge influence. And I've been fortunate enough to work with like many toy companies, Toy Biz, Hasbro, Mattel, and I'll always seek out like, that's right. I always seek out like the older guys that was around. And I was fortunate enough to actually have my office at Hasbro right behind Mark Boudreau's office. And you guys know Mark Boudreau. He is the man. And he would just sit there and just tell me stories after stories after stories. And I was just like I remember when the fax machine first came out. And he was like, the way that he described it, it was like 5G. He was like, the amount of time that we save by having a fax machine, like we can actually send things overnight and get a response the next day. And I'm sitting there like, I want that email to come right now. But for him, it was such a game changer. Like for you guys, it was such a game changer in just like technology, the use of technology, the relationships, the communication, all that stuff where a lot of you guys had to figure out and find a way. And now those journeys became processes now. And so to hear Mark and other guys talk about that stuff is just, number one, is just awe-inspiring, but two, it makes me appreciative of all the stuff they've done and the journey that I'm on, and not taking for granted the inspiration or aspiration that these guys, have, these little, figures. It really means a lot to a lot of people, including myself and everyone else. So, just to be able to pick Mark's brain and just have him, he didn't even know how much of an inspiration he was to me. He had no clue. He was just there doing his thing, but just so much of the love, passion, and time that you guys poured into it just resonated throughout. So, I thank you for knocking on that door and raising hell. I mean, you taught me how to raise hell.
So when we're out in the field shooting the show, the locations are very important too. And, there couldn't have been a location that was more important than, the old Kenner offices in Cincinnati. Brian, Jim, there's a great, shot of you and Corky walking through the offices towards the end of the episode. Brian, is there any particular inspiration for that shot that you want to talk about?
Yeah, we call that shot, and we use it now almost every single thing we do. But at the time, and we still call it this, but the inspiration was, we call it the RoboCop. And the reason we call it that is it's the scene in RoboCop where Murphy, as RoboCop, goes back to his family's house and finds that everybody's gone, his wife, his kids, they've all left. And if you watch, and I don't know if you remember this or not, but you guys thought I was nuts because we were literally this is literally Kroger headquarters. Like when you see all the Kenner stuff in our little toy community, you all think that big old building is Kenner. It is not. 2 floors of that were Kenner. The rest of it was a supermarket chain. So we found some random floor that luckily all had like chairs and plastic and everything. I mean, it couldn't have been better. And we just filmed you guys walking around. And then that led to, like I said, what we call the RoboCop. These 2 guys that had contributed tremendously to all of our childhoods walking around the empty office.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience. We were reminiscing about being in the old office because as we walked by, where my cubicle was and where Corky was a couple of floors ahead, and it was kind of an interesting. We did the sub-basement and the basement.
Yep.
Nobody saw, I don't think.
Nope, that's not in the show. You're right.
It's it was kind of Kenner had left the building years before, and it was kind of interesting that they had an empty floor in the building. So, but revisiting those elevators that we used every day was kind of an interesting thing. So, it's really cool.
Speaking of revisiting things, reenactments are another big part of the first 2 seasons of Toys That Made Us. Can we talk a little bit about why that was decided as an important element to tell the story along with the toys and the interviews?
To be completely honest, it was just an excuse to replicate ILM. Our offices are in Burbank. Van Nuys is right next to Burbank. And we were like, hey, let's reshoot it. This will be cool. And very bizarrely and luckily, I still can't even believe this is true, the original building where ILM was, that's where we filmed the reenactment. So that whole thing was in the same building, just 1 unit down, but under the same roof. Do we have the picture of the circuit breaker? Do we have that?
Let's see. I don't know if it's in this particular montage, but yeah. Oh, it's in this one?
Previous one?
This one?
All right. Well, anyway, the circuit breaker, in the building when we shot, still had in black Sharpie model lights, rotoscope motor. All of it was still written on the light box. So, and there were still things in the building that we found that actually said ILM that are in the show. And maybe one of those things ended up in my home. But anyway, please continue, Rich.
Jim's from Queens. He's from Queens. That's what it is.
Maybe. Wait, this isn't being recorded, is it?
Jim, how weird was it to see yourself in these reenactments, reliving those memories, walking into that
Well,
set
what was
for the
strange,
first time?
I had heard about the reenactment. I had no idea what that actually meant. And when I waited till the series dropped on Netflix, and it was really early in the morning, I started running through it, and the first few minutes, I didn't realize what I was watching. And then I had to stop and rewind.
Wait, I think there's me.
And it was like, oh, wait, I do. So I ended up calling my husband, Emery, and said, you have to come upstairs. We have to watch this. You have to see this thing. Because it was after I think they were talking about who the people were, or they're talking about Debbie Reynolds' daughter. That's when it was like, oh, that's the reenactment they said about it. So it was like reliving the past. And seeing and realizing that guy in the middle was playing me, which is that's really strange stuff, because you realize an actor is playing me and I'm watching him play me.
And by the way, two fun facts to that. Number one, if you watch the scene he's referring to where he's walking through the hallway, you'll notice the top and the right, it's kind of fading off into black, and you might be like, wow, what a stylistic, wow, Brian, such a visionary. No, Brian screwed up, and if you looked carefully at all the blueprints, and again, he's there while they're shooting A New Hope, literally all the blueprints, TIE interceptors, the Death Star under construction, and I'm like, no, we gotta black that out. And then the other fun thing, and this might just be funny to me, the week after we shot the reenactments, we were doing a pilot for History Channel about President Grant, and it's literally this big battle. It's the big battle that would make President Grant become a household name. All the actors are from your reenactment. So the guy who played Dykstra is playing Grant. The guy who played you is playing Jeb Stewart, and it's very funny. Anyway, sorry, Rich.
No worries.
Across time and space.
That's right.
He's now appearing in Treasure Island in New York.
Good.
We're friends on Facebook.
Great. That's so. Is that true?
Yeah.
That's hysterical.
He sold everything he had in L.A. after a while, and went for acting in London. Came back after that, and COVID hit.
So you became friends with the actor who played you?
Yeah. Well, not friends.
That's fantastic.
We follow each other. It's pretty heady stuff to have your name on somebody's resume. I played Jim Swearinger in Toys and Maidens.
I want to make sure we have enough time for the cut stuff.
Absolutely.
We did promise some sneaky, cool stuff, so I don't want to rip you off.
I do want to talk a little bit about the aftermath of the show. So obviously, it aired. Everyone loved it. Thank you so much for watching it again. Go home and watch it again tonight. If you haven't watched it, watch it again for the first time. But let's talk a little bit about, some of the things that happened, since this episode aired, because I think, again, I'm not, the only one who is aware that the value and popularity of these toys has only exploded exponentially since then. How does the hobby look now compared to what it did maybe even just 5 or 6 years ago?
I think it's a lot bigger now than it was 5 or 6 years ago.
To say the least, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's, there's, COVID did some weird stuff to the hobby, obviously, especially on the pricing front. And sometimes that stuff comes back down, but a lot of it never does. And
I think one of the most, heartwarming compliments that I remember seeing once the show aired was that people were saying it inspired them to get back into the collecting game, like to dig out their old toys that they hadn't seen in maybe like 20 years, put them up on their shelves in their office or put some on their desk at work. But it was this kind of collective, just like, oh yeah, I do love those things. I haven't seen them in far too long. I'm going to go back and buy all the ones I didn't have when I was a kid and that sort of thing.
By the way, fun fact, the day before the show premiered, I bought a absolutely mint condition Skunkor. I always get the wrong one. Skunkor for $8. So anyone who's mad at me in the show, deserve it.
It was weird. There were two camps. There were people in our message boards before the show came out already talking about the toys that made us affect, and some people were super stoked because, hey, our collections are going to go up in value, and other people were just like, good, I got to go buy all my vintage Transformers now while I still can.
Well, and I think when the show started, a lot of people just assumed it was people that weren't really fans producing a show and doing a cash grab, and
we assure you that was never the case.
I can vouch for these guys that they are legit fans, actual toy collectors, and were so.
A lot of
before
those
the show
Star
started.
Wars figures on that light box.
Some of us got a little
My
crazy
figures.
after the show took off.
That is accurate.
I think one of the things that the show did was really show that toys and everything about it is more than just a toy or collecting. It's more like a lifestyle. Like back in the day, guys, it was a different type of collection. And when I was a kid, I always saw like my cousins. He had Harleys and everything, and had the jackets, the gloves, the boots. And that was like a lifestyle for them. And I think that now toys and just pop culture in general is more like a lifestyle now. So it's like we don't feel ashamed or afraid when we go and say, hey, we're buying toys. I think there's like this weird stigmatism to the word toy, like a romanticized feeling. But toys encompass just everything, business, pop culture, everything. And it could be this huge icebreaker to convey thoughts, bring people together, in ways that, politicians or just people, just bureaucrats can't even do. It really does bring us together in ways that is longing and lasting in ways that, other things or religions even try to do. So now this is kind of like our new religion, and we're not afraid to express it and show it. That's just what I got out of the show.
Well said. So there are a few things we learned along the way. We already talked about Jim Kipling's massive bombshell, which I think might be the biggest one. The other one that really struck me was the business about how they just forgot to renew the license, and no one seemed to notice.
That happens a lot in this world.
And all the different toy companies that for a window of time were competing for this license, and it was everybody. It was Playmates, it was Mattel, it was everyone who was making toys, basically threw everything they had. But as history would say, it stuck with Hasbro. But as Brian teased, we did have to leave some stuff out. I think you often say that the original cut of Star Wars is around 2 hours, give or take. Over 2 hours.
Way over 2 hours. Way over 2 hours.
I think at some point we were told, they can go as long as you want them to, or as long as you need them to, and then they were just like, nah, just kidding, 50 minutes, please. So things unfortunately had to get left out, including this iconic guy who's kind of become our unofficial mascot of sorts, and this guy is still looking for one, so if anyone has one for a good price, come see him after the panel.
Emphasis the word good price.
But a couple of other things that got left out were a second reenactment featuring this gentleman at the end of the table. And I can't wait to hear your anecdote about this particular
Have you ever seen
moment.
this?
No,
Okay.
I missed
This
this.
is very exciting. All right.
You haven't shown me the
This is a story you told us that we were not aware of in your interview, that you were brought into a screening and everybody was like, oh my God, you're not going to believe this, you're not going to believe this. Set it up afterwards, let's show it to them, and then do the commentary after so we don't give away the surprise.
I get the opportunity to see more from the real thing. Somebody says, okay, run it. Lights. The lights go down and the projector starts. Well, I'm ready to see the movie. And all I see on the screen is a couple little blinking lights down in the corner.
Perfect. Hey, great job, guys.
It's like I'm expecting to see spaceships and all I see are blinking lights. Those blinking lights were probably composited in some scene that I probably saw in the movie, but have no idea where they were. But at the time, having those lights blink was important to the productions, not so much the building toys. Yeah, that's what happened. It was my first trip out to see Lucasfilm. And again, I was all by myself. I managed to get from the LAX airport to Universal Studios before it was an amusement park in a car with no GPS. And I rented the car for the first time. So I get to Universal Studios, and this is all, I got to visit the studio, got to eat at the cantina, and then we went to ILM. And they had this room full of ugly old couches out of somebody's grandma's, out of their living room. And the lights went down, everybody piles in the room, and it's literally blinking lights in the corner of a black screen. Great job, we love that. And they all left the room, and it really was exactly that. I was expecting, I had seen an X-Wing and a TIE fighter in the hall, and a Death Star, and I'm thinking I'm going to go in and see that dogfight that I read in the script. But no, I got blinking lights and had to wait. I only had to wait a little more than a month because this was April 4th. I'm pretty sure that's because they were blowing up the Death Star the day before I got there. That line from we were blowing up the Death Star, if you go online, you can see the sets, those things where they're blowing things up. But it was a month before that I was in watching blinking lights. And then I'd wait another month to see where those blinking lights were.
So that takes us to Q&A. I don't know how much time we have for that.
We have exactly 1 minute and 49 seconds.
Lightning round. Okay.
Well, there's a breakaway room.
There's a breakaway room?
Yeah.
Oh. Gus, what do you think?
The last surprise in our minute and 38 seconds, the ultimate ramification for making the show, and this is, I know we're saying it's 5 years later, but it's actually only 4.5 years later, is thanks to the people around me, especially this dude. I brought this. Our company is now making toys. This is the first prototype for Max Steel's arm from Roboforce, for those of you that are not familiar with the Roboforce line. But we bought the copyright. We had our on sale at the end of March. There's still a couple left if you're interested. But a production company that made a show about toys in December of 2017 is now making toys. So if there's nothing that explains how lucky we all are up here, this weird-looking claw, I think, signifies it quite well.
Would you consider that a relic?
This is the first physical product our company ever made.
Yeah.
Yeah. Designed by this guy, and painted by this guy, and printed by this guy.
There will be more of it, but
Oh, yeah. If you're wondering why I only have an arm, he's allowed to punch me in the face if I ever bring a prototype to a panel again. Because they don't travel well.
No, who knew?
There's
Prototypes,
movie magic and then there's
very
toy
fragile,
disaster.
very fragile. Okay, we've got some time for quick questions. You there in the flight suit.
All we can tell you legally, stay tuned. But if it were dead, I would tell you that too. But it's not dead. Stay tuned.
You miss.
I have to say that if you haven't seen this show, see the Star Wars one, and then watch the Mega. I have never laughed so hard in my
I have done so many panels. I am so grateful you said that. When she says the Mego one, she means the Star Trek one. And what is your name? Althea. You're 1,000% right. The Star Trek episode was absolutely designed to show the opposite of what could happen and not to take for granted that success always comes. So it's a bookend situation where the Star Trek episode is the mirror of the Star Wars episode. Because in Star Wars, everything to some degree goes right, at least by the end. In the Star Trek episode and the Star Trek history of toys, up until practically this very minute, nothing ever goes right. So nobody has ever pointed that out before, so thank you.
Yeah. Marty Aves, yeah.
That's right. That's right. Kobayashi Maru, right there.
Marty saw Star Wars before I did.
You have to twist that knife, huh? You have to twist that knife.
Yes, sir.
There is a Blu-ray. It's only $89.99. There is a Blu-ray that is on it. The whole Vlix pod that we made, that was, believe it or not, 4 minutes long.
There's also
4 minutes on Vlix. That's all on the Blu-ray.
There's also an extended interview with Mr. Swearingen on that Blu-ray as one of the special features.
Yeah, his whole interview's on it.
Yeah.
Sorry? That is not in it. But maybe if we do another one, we should add it, because it's actually really, really cool what they had down there. Yeah.
I also want to let everybody know that if you are on the floor later and you come by Billy Galaxy's booth at booth number what?
1354.
1354, you can pick up one of these Toy Store passports that we kicked off this year. It's like your normal passport that you would use when you're traveling, except it's for toy stores, and you can see all the ones that participate if you go to the website. But we are offering a show-exclusive Star Wars Celebration stamp that you could only get today.
$89.99.
But
It's free. It's free.
It's free. It's right here. So pick up your passport, get a stamp at Billy's booth, and thank you.
If you ever go to Portland, Oregon, this is, and God bless Blast from the Past, this is my favorite store in the whole country. Probably the whole world. Sorry. Japan always beats us. But other than that, Billy Galaxy.
Wait. Show of hands. Don't say anything. Who saw Obi-Wan Kenobi last night? That's all I got to say. Just
Thank you so much for coming, guys.
Thank
We're
you,
going to play
thank
you
you,
out
thank
with
you.
this one.
These are the toys that made us.
It's an 8-part documentary series about the toys that we all know. Plastic creations that last for generations and we still cannot let go. Little molded figures that gave us big dreams will go back in time and behind the scenes. It's the toys that made us.